I did want to ask you about your the Punk Monks kind of
Yeah,
band
yeah.
and how that all came to be. So how did that start?
So every practice period at Tassajara, there's a skit night, and you have to you come up with something. And so me, myself, uh, Dylan, I can't remember his last name, and another student there named Jay. We all had a background in punk rock and hardcore, and so we came up with this like acoustic song that I wrote. And but Dylan was really crucial in arranging the music. He was kind of like the mastermind behind it all, but he was the drummer. And it was like really tailored toward uh that particular practice period. And I think that's the thing about skit nights at practice period. They're usually like lots of inside jokes, and it's a good time. Um, even like a part of the song, like we sang about nutloaf, which I don't know if you know what nutloaf is.
Mm-mm.
Nutloaf is like a Zen Center special meal. It's cashews and walnuts and mushrooms and egg and cheese, and it's like what we have on Thanksgiving uh, for at Zen Center. So there were like songs about that. There were songs about there is parts about Sajiki, parts about my teacher Linda Ruth, who was in the audience at the time. You know, so
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And was it modeled on a punk rock song that you're familiar with, or did you kind of like just kind of use that another song as a vehicle to kind
Oh,
of insert, or did you kind of come up with a whole approach yourself?
so I took the chords. I took the chords from a Get Up Kids song, if you know
Okay.
the Get Up Kids, and but I totally arranged it. I don't think it would be recognizable if I didn't disclose that, and yeah, I didn't offer that information to anyone. But yeah, the chord progression is different. But yeah, most of the chords came from a Get Up Kids song, uh, which I don't know the name of, but I remember the chorus, of course. But
Yeah.
yeah, Long Way from Home. Yeah. So
Oh, gotcha.
yeah.
And just with Tassajara having a skit night, that makes me kind of think that there is a lot more than just very serious weighted zazen experiences or kind of work periods and things like that. There are times where people can develop enough of a relationship where there are inside jokes and there are moments of
Oh,
casualness.
yes. Yeah. There's, I mean, nothing is so funny as when it's forbidden. So, I think, yeah, you'd probably be surprised how many practical jokes, occurred, in formal settings. Yeah, for sure. I'm thinking of, do you know who Greg Fain is? He's a Zen teacher. He was the Tonto at Tassajara while I was there, and I can still hear uh and as Tonto is the position in the temple where you're sort of in charge of, yeah, decorum, discipline, training. um yeah, and we were all giggling in the zendo, and I can still hear Greg Fain's voice, like we're all facing the wall sitting zazen, and the giggles start, right, and everyone just starts giggling. There's probably like 40 or 50 students, priests, all mixed in, and I can hear Greg Fain going, "Why don't you try sitting zazen?" Like in the background. There's plenty of opportunities. I think the biggest opportunity to to be mischievous is during our formal oryoki meals. Because there's a drum. I mean, there's just like all kinds of stuff. And April Fool's Day in the temple was always just like full of, you know, hilarious spectacles, and like very serious conversations afterwards too. Like we're taking this very seriously. I can think of like a million stories, but um we had these like coyote, uh I don't know, like it wasn't a real coyote, but it was like something you could buy at like a garden supply, like a plastic coyote to scare away deer from eating our crops and whatnot. And so one thing that, we eventually got in trouble for was moving this this coyote. Like we'd put it like in front of like somebody's door, right? And so they come out of their cabin and then they would get, frightened because there'd be this, coyote there. Or someone, there's a meal offering to the Buddha, and there's a tiny, tiny little oryoki bowl that goes on this tray, and somebody took the tiny, tiny oryoki bowl and switched it out with someone's actual eating bowl. Are you familiar with oryoki?
Yeah, it's like the formal approach to eating, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and you have like a set of bowls, like lay people generally have like three. Uh, Priests have like a very, we essentially use three, but for whatever reason, there's like six bowls in there, and you got to like shuffle them around and figure them out. But uh, so somebody like, and your third bowl is the bowl that is the one that gets the cheese or the fat, like the best part of the meal usually goes in the third bowl. Uh, and so someone switched out someone's, because your bowls live in the zendo, right? Like you wrap them up, you clean them on your off day, but you just set them next to your seat and they're kind of like always there. So instead of having like a normal, small soup bowl, it was like a tiny, like it looked like it was for like a Barbie, And so you have this tiny bowl, and there's really no like stopping the show. There's like no stopping oryoki once it occurs, and you kind of just have to go with it. So, that person probably got like one piece of tofu, and that bowl. Uh, and I remember the Tenzo, shaking people down, like, where is the bowl? I know you know where it's at, I was like, I really don't know where the
Yeah.
ball is at. But and even if I did, I wouldn't snitch. So
Wow. That is,
yeah.
it is really special to hear how much fun you can have at Tassajara, because like yeah, like when you think of it, it's just in this monastic setting. It's way out there in the wilderness. There's a lot of intensity, and yet there's so many games, so much
Oh,
room for
sure.
games, and
Yeah.
this what was that thing that you were saying about something about forbidden? It's like
Yeah, like forbidden mischief is like even more fun,
yeah, yeah, something like yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
and
yeah.
if there's a lot of things that are forbidden, there's a lot of opportunities for mischief.
Right. Yeah.
That's
And
the
it's
kind.
yeah, and I think that's probably what I learned the most about from monastic training, which is, you're the same human that goes in there. And, maybe before going into the monastery, it was like, oh, yeah, I go out every Friday night and I stay out really late and party. And now you're in the monastery and it's like, oh, yeah, like on day off, like I eat 8 cookies, like I eat, you know what I mean? Like you're the same human. Silence doesn't exist, you know. At
Yeah.
some point you're sitting zazen and you're like, man, I sure wish Tassajara Creek was more quiet. You know what I mean? Like, man, that creek's obnoxious. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, it's not a babbling brook. It's like a full-on chatter of a creek happening. Wow.
I
Is it
mean,
is the Zendo right on top of a creek basically, or is it definitely within earshot?
yeah, actually, it's Carbarga Creek runs into Tassajara Creek, and Carbarga, when it rains, it goes from like being a 5 inch deep stream to like something that looks more like a river. It can be 10 feet deep at points, and really loud. And the hydraulic force is so intense that like you'll actually hear like boulders moving with the flow of water, and it has this like grinding sound. You'll hear this. Yeah, for sure.
Wow. Even when
So
even when you're not kind of having sitting stillness kind of moment, you can just kind of
no,
like yeah, when you go
yeah,
off to
you'll
bed
hear
or
it
something like that.
for
Wow.
sure. You'll hear it. Yeah.
Wow. What did you have a nature-based service or work service that was at Tassajara while you were there, or were you specialized or offering your services elsewhere in the monastic community?
So your job gets moved around quite a bit. Uh, but for most of my time at Tassajara, I worked as a plant manager and then like on staff, like on the maintenance crew. So that is pretty nature based actually, because you do a lot of like road clearing. Like there were days where, you know, we got to keep the flow of food coming in and out in the winters, and I would spend a 10 or 12-hour day just driving the 14-mile road. It would take me forever, right? And there would be like landslides that we have to clear, trees that came down that we'd have to, chop up and move. Um, and then yeah, so I spent one season as a guest cook, so working in the kitchen and preparing meals for guests. And and then yeah, the rest of my time there was I spent 3 years at Tassajara, and the rest of my years I spent at Green Gulch. But yeah, I was, over my course of time, over the 10 years at Zen Center, I worked on the farm crew, worked in maintenance, and then eventually, like my last 2 years was primarily focusing on wildland fire and wildland fire preparation, and then also responding to fires at Tassajara. So I ended up, responding to three fires over my 10 years there. The longest being the Soberantes in 2016. I think I spent 80 days on that fire. And then there was the Dolan fire. I think that was 2020. And that was like a 45-day fire. And then a small fire, the Willow fire. I can't remember. Maybe it was 2021, actually. Yeah. That was a quick one. It was only like 20 days. But ironically, probably the most rowdy fire. That was the one where yeah, we could like be at the Tassajara gate and sort of see the flames like on the ridge. Like it burned right up to the ridge line uh behind Tassajara. So it was less than a mile away. It was like point 0.5, miles
Wow.
away. So
And it's more than just that imminent threat of seeing it on the ridge. I mean, because an ember could fly up and then fly back down, right?
sure.
And all kinds of things
Yeah.
could happen. Wow.
Yeah.
And did that kind of inspire in you to do more wildfire
For
service
sure.
work? Yeah. So
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
so did your experience at Tahara begin that, or did you always kind of have an interest in working in that capacity?
I had like a glancing interest. So in 2010, I was a national park ranger in Texas, and we had a fire. I wasn't like on a fire crew for National Park Service, but I was just like a regular ranger, you know. And yeah, we had a pretty rowdy fire, and ended up, getting exposed to fire, working on a hand line for a second. But yeah, it was just like it was a pretty quick 3-day fire, but that was pretty much my introduction to fire. And then I moved out to California, and then it becomes this sort of ever present, ever looming threat. Plus, Tassajara had its history with fires, going back to like 1970, where there's like, pictures of Baker Roshi with a drip torch, lighting off a hillside with like a hotshot crew behind him, kind of helping him along. And so then so while I was working as I think I forget what my title was. It was something like it might have been director of emergency response, or it might something like that for Zen Center, or like safety officer. Yeah, safety officer. I started working for the Bureau of Land Management as an on-call firefighter, and I would go out on fires out of Nevada and start just like, keeping my certifications up. And yeah, they put me through like quite a bit of leadership training. And yeah, it was cool. And then when I left Zen Center, I did a season with that same, they call it an AD program, administratively determined, which just means, you go to your basic training in the spring, and then they'll call you up and put you on a hand crew. So I ended up, you know, fighting fire with the Bureau of Land Management in Oregon, Nevada, Arizona. Uh, yeah, so it did. Yeah, and it's definitely it's a great job. I miss it for sure. But it's a little hard on the family because you're gone quite a bit. So I would be gone for like about 28 days or something like that, and then come home, be here for 2 days, and then get dispatched out to another fire. Um,
For sure.
yeah.
And not to mention, the hazardous conditions of it all, and the amount of kind of physical strain that kind of asks of you. Because I remember a couple years ago when we were talking, there is this like you're kind of like camping, right? You're kind of camping
Oh yeah.
as you fight the fires, and so it's not like you have these like
Same.
roving facilities that are following you as you do
No.
it. You're kind of like just showing up and planning yourself where you can to get some rest.
Yeah, I think
Eh,
camping is an overstatement.
okay.
Uh, at the end of the day, most hand crews will spike out somewhere is what you call it, and you basically you get out of your trucks and uh, you know leadership will be like, if you've been in fire for less than 5 years, sleep over there. If you're more senior, sleep on this side, and you essentially just get out there and you have your hand tool and you just make sure there's like no rocks or snakes or whatever, and then you just put your sleeping mat down and your sleeping bag. Like tenting up in wildland fire is yeah, rare. You really don't have time, it would just take too long each morning to clear camp and mess around with all that. Yeah, I think no one's gonna stop you. Like they issue you a tent, and you'll see like the newer guys like maybe set up their tent because they don't want to like cowboy camp, but they learn pretty quickly like you'd much rather not be the last person to the truck. Uh, so
Come morning,
yeah,
or yeah, yeah.
yeah, in the morning, yeah.
And and I'd imagine you're tired enough that any kind of maybe critter or bug or whatever it is that comes in, you're gonna sleep through that whatever it is crawling on you or over you.
Yeah, I never noticed anything, to be honest. I think, having 20 people sort of sleep in an area together, like critters are like, no, thank you. So, yeah, so, uh, yeah, and
Yeah.
actually, yeah, the worst place to camp is like the main fire camp, like at the ICP or whatever, the instant command post, because it's just so loud. There's so many crews, there's lights and things like that. So, we'd prefer to spike out on a ridge line somewhere and like have, they'll collect the meals for everyone, bring them back, and we'll just eat, at the truck. And
Wow. And I
yeah.
remember when we were talking about your experience fighting fires, that as far as like practice goes at that time, you would feel like when you connect to your practice when you're doing things like that, or just as you go about your daily life, no matter what it is that you're doing. But in this case, firefighting, you had mentioned that you would like to just bring along a copy of the Blue Cliff Record or something like that, and that would kind of sustain.
Actually, it
Mhm.
was Zuimonki.
Oh, okay.
Do you know? Oh, sorry, I'm moving my thing back because I want to lean.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Zuimonki. It's the Soto uh offers for free like all these copies of Zuimonki. Um,
Oh,
and I
what
carry
is
them.
that?
And
Mhm.
Zuimonki is the recorded teachings of Dogen, recorded by his disciple Koen Ajo.
Oh,
Uh, and this particular version was translated by Shohaku Okamura. Um, that was usually my go-to because it's small,
yeah.
and yeah, and also it was a formative like book in my trajectory to ordaining and seeking out monastic life. It's definitely like it's less philosophical and more of that sort of way seeking mind, inspiring rally cry to practice. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
So did you kind of stumble across that, or was that something that hit you right at the right time in your introduction as you're kind of developing your practice? That's like, oh, okay, this is actually going to serve as a
yeah,
catalyst for me to dive deeper.
yeah. It's interesting. The first session I ever sat was in Mississippi. So I was practicing at New Orleans Zen Temple at the time, which is a Deshimaru lineage temple. And I go and I sit sesshin in Mississippi. I actually didn't love it. It was like pretty, arduous. And then one of the guys there, who I'm still really good friends with, actually just met with him in New Orleans. He's still there. His name is Jeff Canton, and he handed me, a copy of Zuimonki, and at that point, yeah, I can't remember, like, I can't give like the detailed account of how it made me want to take Jukai, I ended up moving into the New Orleans Zen Temple. I lived there for about a year. Very small, maybe 15 regular members with like a lot of people who visit on Sunday or pass through. But that sort of, set my hair on fire, as they say. Uh, and yeah, so that it was a I totally recommend it, especially if you don't have many. ways to take care of yourself. You know, you're not like ready to like dig into more philosophical things like from Shōbōgenzō or other pieces of Dharma. Um, yeah, Zuimonki is still a go-to for me. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I'll have
So
to check, and you can download the PDF of that through
oh, I'm
the
sure. Yeah, and it's spelled Zuimonki.
yeah,
Zuimonki. Yeah.
Zuimonki. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's not actually Dogen's writings. It's Koan Ejo like recording. I think he probably wrote it after Dogen died. Um, you know, so
Just like just like kind of an account of like what was said, and then that's translated by someone like Shohaku Okumura or something like that.
yeah,
That yeah.
yeah,
Wow. And then
yeah.
so what got you to sit that session in New Orleans for the first time? Like had you been exploring other Buddhist traditions before you started finding Soto Zen being the main
No,
draw
not
for you?
really.
Mm.
No, I really came by Zen. Like I don't know, I just got lucky. But um, you know, the first book I ever read about Zen was written by a Jesuit priest named Ben Ren. Uh, and he was a Jesuit priest in New Orleans, and he wrote this book called Zen Under the Magnolia. And I was working on Bourbon Street at the time. I was about 19 years old, and yeah, I found this book, bought it for $2, and then it turned out that he was a professor of my stepmother. My stepmother had somewhat of a Buddhist practice. She actually belonged to a like a meditation group for therapists, so she kind of like pushed me in that direction. But I never really dabbled outside of Zen. Um, and then I picked up Zen Mind Beginner's Mind, which at the time, my mind was not ready for that. And I read it and I was just like, I don't understand any of this. I didn't like it. And then I picked up Brad Warner's Hardcore Zen. So this is probably like, I don't know, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003. And then all these things they just start to like fall into place. So I move into a apartment in uptown New Orleans. And I've never been in a Zen temple. I've been sitting meditation on my own, mostly through the instruction of Brad Warner, uh, because his book Hardcore Zen was so easy to digest. It was like it met me where I was. Um, so I'm sitting there, and my neighbor, we shared a wall between us. Like we lived in what we call a shotgun house, and he was on one side, I was on the other. Sunday morning, and I see him like going down the steps, and he's holding a zafu. And I was like, "Oh, like, where are you going?" He's like, "Oh, I'm going to the Zen temple." And I was like, "We have a Zen temple?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "You want to come?" So I went, and yeah, at the time I was hungover because it's Sunday, right? And I was wearing a pink t-shirt with this like yellow graphic on it. And it was from the Leslie and the Lies. So I'm wearing this pink t-shirt and it says, uh when I DDR, I dance to the max. When I rock the mic, I charge hip hop tax, right? I'm wearing this t-shirt and like a brown pair of Dickies, and a pair of Converse Chucks. And so I go down to the Zen temple, like looking rough, and sit down and yeah, yeah, Zazen was cool. Like I was into it. It was a 40-minute period. It was like murder, right? Like for someone who's only been sitting like 15 minutes a day or something. But I get through like the two periods, and I'm just kind of like, what in the world is this? Uh, in some ways, like the temple was very traditional. Like Robert was the head teacher there, and he's since passed. But he you know, like wore his robes, and he's probably like this 85-year-old man, bald head, like hanging jowls, really gruff voice, and offers the Kiyosaku, which I've never had in any other temple before. I don't know, Kiyosaku is like the stick of awakening. It's like a oak stick, right? And I'm just like sitting, and you don't really know what's going on. Like I didn't get an introduction or anything like that. It just kind of got dropped in, and you just hear Robert, go Kiyosaku, and then he goes around, and people who ask for it, puts it on his shoulder, and then I hear people getting like whacked with this with this stick, and and then we turn around, and we're gonna do ceremony. we're just chanting the Hanya Shinyo, very basic. And I was just like, "This is nuts." There's, like, shoko, offerings, there's smoke everywhere, and it's like, uh, yeah, so I'm having this experience, and I really didn't want anything to do with what I considered, like, the religious aspects of Buddhism at the time. Um, that came later, but yeah, so that was kinda like my entry into formal Soto Zen practice, and, yeah, that's kinda how it happened.
Yeah.
Just
And
my neighbor heading down the steps, and then, 20 years later, I'm, a priest,
yeah,
so.
yeah, it's amazing. And the to have you after a big night out show up, roll up, be accepted as you were then, and also for you to accept what was going on as you were then, because having a rough morning and then sitting and doing an extended meditation period can be really difficult. And so I'm so glad that you found yourself sitting, staying, getting something out of it,
Mm,
not being like thrown by the experience, but if anything, it kind of like led to a very committed and devoted lifestyle change and focus. That's amazing. And then what did kind of start roping you into incorporating more religious ritual elements into your practice, or like what led to that openness?
mm, probably bowing, you know? Like, the act of Zazen, I feel like the potential to stay pretty ego driven is ripe, like, I'm going to sit zazen so that I can become this thing, and or whatever, so I can have this experience where, the act of bowing is such a humble release, and I think that's what softened me to all this, and then also just conversations like with the teacher. So Robert would offer at the end of each Sunday period, he would say, we called it Mundo, and it was like question and answer with the teacher, and that's pretty much it. Like, he didn't give Dharma talks. Like, this is all you're gonna get from Robert. so, so I remember, and I was reading on my own, and Deshimaru had his own literature that I was reading, and he told a story that's been, I think he just kind of told us his own, but it's an old Buddhist story, um, where a prostitute puts on the okesa and her life is like changed, right? She becomes like a Buddha. She becomes a monk and stuff like that. So I say to Robert, like, I don't know about this. Like, this sounds like superstition, And he was just like, it's not superstition, it's fact, you know. And I think just the orthopraxy of taking that leap into when you receive the Buddha's robe, it's not a Buddha's robe, it is the Buddha's robe. And I think it falls in line with Dogen's practice enlightenment model, that you're not sitting zazen to become enlightened, but you're sitting zazen as an act of practice enlightenment, that it's like one and the same, you know. Um and yeah, that was perfect for me because I was such a flawed human being, with someone who overthinks things, someone who um yeah, that kind of body practice is what opened me up to the larger picture of Buddhism and the Bodhisattva way. And it's been a journey, right? It's like some days, I mean, there were years where I was like, reincarnation is 110% real, and this is how I'm going to do it. And then other days where you're just like, I don't know, man. I don't know any dead Buddhists, so I really don't know. you know? Uh, and I think yeah, having a framework of practice where great doubt is encouraged, to really live with, work with, and see what's real right now, you know um
Yeah. And I it's a wonderful window into kind of some of the things that you're up to now, is that your Instagram, especially with kind of shows a window into your work as an army chaplain. And one of the videos that I watched you make was about how you have your uh is it battle drill, where you kind of treat
yeah.
your morning ritual with with a dedication and a regimen element to it,
Yeah.
and you show up to it every day, and you get the practice in that you can get in that day, but you still show up. And I wanted to know like a little bit more about what your experience has like been, from training and working both at Tassajara and Green Gulch, and then going into chaplaincy within another kind of regimented area in life. Like what are what are some things that you've been bringing from your experiences within Zen into your work as a chaplain?
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest realizations is, we always say, or, maybe Koto Sawaki said it, like, "Zazen is for nothing," right? But, like, lately, I've been, like, living with this gratitude for the opportunity I had to train at Zen Center for 10 years and put what I think is, like, you know, dharma in the bank, or and what I mean to say is this, it's like when I take my seat now in those small moments while I'm on duty, when I take my seat, when I try and sit zazen or I bow or I chant, uh, everything comes all at once, or it has the potential to. And just how, uh, what's the word? Is it just how, I'm trying to find a different word, useful, other than useful. But it's like it's really useful to have sesshin experience or monastic experience, and then you're put in this thing where it's like, I only have 30 seconds right now, or I only have a minute. Um, it helps you just take your seat a little more quickly, and it transports you to a spiritual home that's unavailable at the time, you know. And I'm also really grateful for my opportunities in the army where this stuff means so much more to me now, It's like it's made me a better Zen Buddhist, or it's made me, really appreciate and rely upon my refuge, right? Where it's like it's kinda hard to remember that you need refuge when you're in a monastery because 'cause you're kinda, like, in it, right? And where do you go for refuge if you're already in the monastery, you're already ordained, you're already, living this full-time thing? Um, I think what I'm most grateful for is just being reminded to take refuge in the things that fill my cup. Um, and yeah. And then as far as how monastic experience made me a decent army chaplain, I don't know if it did. I think I think the best thing it can do is just like give you patience and just like roll with it. Needs of the army are always primary. So it's like, when I'm offering services or I'm offering counseling to soldiers, it's within this uh, framework, or as we call like the horse blanket, we call it a horse blanket. Um, it's tied into the horse blanket where, you don't have a ton of time to allow soldiers to practice their religious freedom. So as much as I'm there as a Zen Buddhist army chaplain, I'm also there to support people to practice whatever religion they have because we're all kind of in the same soup where uh, it's not as easy as civilian life where you can cut out time or it's so I advocate for troops too. I make sure like, hey, what do you need in order to practice your pagan faith, or what do you need in order to like how do I get you communion? Like I have a lot of Catholic troops who need communion. So sometimes it's like, calling out to other Catholic army chaplains who might be able to come and visit and provide that service. That's really important to them. And yeah, so I think being flexible, um and yeah, and also just providing a different mode of being. I think not a lot of people are used to how Zen Center folk or Zen Soto, and I can't speak for all Soto Zen priests. I'm pretty much a product of San Francisco Zen Center. So uh but we don't really like proselytize. I don't really like, I'm not super in everyone's face about being an army chaplain. I'm there for them. And I think some people appreciate, this kind of quiet presence somewhat in the background, or just kind of doing whatever work we have to do. We have a lot of mundane work to do, whether it's changing the tire on a Humvee, to, we got to unload all these sea bags off of a plane, whatever it is, just being present with them. Um, and it's kind of for me, uh, thinking about the Bodhisattva vow of kind of the lotus coming from muddy water. That's what army life is like,
Wow. So,
yeah.
because I'm not entirely familiar with chaplaincy within the army, but like, so you are also there unloading seeds from planes and jacking up Humvees and all that too, or you're kind of just in the environment doing your work, which is separate from some tasks that other people in other positions might be fulfilling.
It's both, and there's a fine line, right? Where like you have to be careful. Like I'm an army chaplain, but I'm also an officer. And so, like if an officer starts changing the tire on a Humvee, you might accidentally be making a junior enlisted soldier look bad, right? You could get them in trouble, right? Because their sergeant will come by and be like, "Why is this officer doing this? That's your job, etc." But there have been opportunities where it totally made sense. So you kind of have to like feel it out. You don't want to be you want to maintain, the boundaries that are set in place by the army. But the last time I changed a tire on a Humvee, we were at Fort Polk, Louisiana, doing this thing called JRTC. And if there's any soldiers watching this, like I can say no more because that is a pretty horrible experience. And I was embedded with a company of infantry soldiers, and this is a training environment, but it is like, we had gone like 48 hours without food, 24 hours with like very little water. Um, one canteen, is like, hey, the water buffalo's out. Like the water that you have on your person is the water that you have, until so ration. And all of the platoons were like in a forward position and fighting. And I was back with the company commander and a first sergeant. And at the time, this was like maybe 4 years ago. And I think the first sergeant was yeah, he's probably like, I think he was like 60. He looked kind of old and tired, right? And the company commander's on the phone, and our training supervisor's like, hey, this Humvee has been notionally disabled. Uh if you want it to work, you have to change the tire. Okay. So it's this thing. So company commander's doing something, first sergeant's trying, and I was like, first sergeant, like, let me get in here, and never so simple because it was wet. It had been raining, right? And so put the jack under the Humvee, start jacking it up. Well, it sinks, right? It's just like driving this jack into the ground like a nail. So I was like, how am I going to make this work? Okay, find a folding metal chair, put that under the Humvee so it has more of a surface area to support it, right? Um, but yeah, you'll as an army chaplain, you're going to find opportunities to fit in, and yeah, you're right there with them. It's a unique position because you're doing that, but you're also special staff to the battalion commander. So you're also like in meetings, and you have the battalion commander's ear in a way that, other troops might not. Um, there's like a direct line between the chaplain and the battalion commander where everyone else has to go through the chain of command. Like you go from your squad leader who might be a sergeant to the platoon leader who might be a lieutenant to the company commander is probably a captain to the XO, so on and so forth. And I just go straight to the battalion commander. So
Yeah.
yeah, but it can be pretty hands-on. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, it sounds like, if something needs to be done and you can offer that, so long as you don't make someone else look bad, or you can handle it yourself, or if you have to handle it yourself, then you jump
Yeah.
in. And then yeah, it sounds like a really unique and special position where you can jump these rank other things that other people positions within an army setting can't quite access right away. And so you have this kind of, you're obviously tethered and tied to a lot of different relationships, and there is like a way that you're supposed to maneuver and act, but there's also like a degree of freedom, or a degree of like flexibility, adaptability that you can kind of work on or work with.
Yeah.
That's really well. I'm so happy that you found this position for yourself, and it sounds like you really are being very fulfilled by doing it. And I was looking at the way you approach, especially for the videos that you make for soldiers, with your army chaplaincy. You have your uniform, like your military uniform, and you have a Dharma wheel on your hat. And I was wondering if was that something that is typical for chaplains to have some sort of symbol that denotes what faith tradition
Yeah.
they're associated with? Yeah.
Yeah, for Army chaplains specifically. I've seen Air Force chaplains, like, they'll wear their rank, but for Army chaplains, like, we wear our rank down here on our chest, and then we have a religious symbol over here,
Mhm.
and then, yeah, religious symbol on your, headgear, whether it's a helmet or whatnot. And, yeah, depending on your faith background, like, you'll wear a cross or you'll wear, like, the Muslim chaplains have, like, kinda like the moon type thing,
Mhm, mhm.
Jewish chaplains have, the Torah actually is their symbol.
Wow.
So, yeah, so Buddhist chaplains all wear the wheel of Dharma, um, yeah, to signify, that we're chaplains.
Yeah.
Unfortunately and fortunately, not a lot of soldiers are familiar with the wheel of Dharma. So, I often get, like, a lot of, like, uh, second glances, like, "What is going on here?" Because from afar, it's like a big black spot from afar, which kinda looks like a colonel insignia, or a lieutenant colonel. So sometimes, like, I'll come in to a room and people will, like, straighten up in this way before they look down, and then they'll see. Or, you know, one time I was walking on post, and an E4, like a specialist, he saw my chest insignia, and he kinda, like, paused me and kinda, like, asked me a bunch of questions because it looked like my uniform was messed up, you know? Like, "How could you be wearing, a colonel's rank on your hat and a captain's rank on your chest?" And I was like, "No, no, this is a wheel of Dharma, I'm a chaplain." You know? Um, so it also looks, like, I can't think of what we call it, like, 88 Mike. 88 Mike is, like, transportation. So it's this wheel, right? And they're like, "Oh, are you like are you a transportation officer? Like, what's that?" And I was like, "I'll take you wherever you want to go." But yeah, it's pretty interesting to yeah. So all chaplains do that. The first symbol that army chaplains wore was actually a shepherd's crook. Um, they all wore a shepherd's crook, and then it moved over to the cross, and then there was Jewish chaplains that came in, and so then they did that. They made their own symbol. Yeah, and so now, yeah, that's how it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and, uh, I like how, you had told your story about this kind of, like, fine line that you work with and all, and there's this, like, maneuverability that you have among different ranks, and then it's also that very relationship that you have with the rest of the army that you're positioned with. You also get it just by the nature of wearing what you have to wear. Everyone's kind of like, "What's your deal? So what's
Yeah,
going
yeah,
on?"
totally.
It's pretty remarkable. And then when you're working as an army chaplain, as a Soto Zen priest, uh, and I don't know what's the case for other Buddhist chaplains that are out there that are serving military personnel, but do you find that a lot of people are like, oh, Buddhism, Soto Zen, that is something that is generally cool with a lot of stuff. Now I feel a little bit more open to talking to you.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, like your atheist soldiers, your agnostic soldiers who wouldn't feel who feel like maybe they don't wanna speak to someone who's wearing the cross. Often they come to me, and I'm honest with them too, because 'cause they'll come and say like, "Oh, yeah, I like Zen because it's not religious." And I was like, "Well," yeah, I was like, I mean, it doesn't have to be, right? I mean, the way that I was brought into Soto Zen was I didn't have to do any ceremony that I didn't wanna do. I could just go sit Zazen, but I also feel like it's disingenuine to my, Christian brothers and sisters who are chaplains when I'm like, "Oh, yeah, like, we're totally atheist and agnostic." It's like, no, you talk to one Zen priest is as Zen priest does. Like, some of them are, my second teacher, so after, Robert, my second teacher was Kosho McCall at Austin Zen Center. And, he was an Episcopalian priest who went on sabbatical to Tassajara and never left, but he didn't quite renounce like his Episcopalian ordination or upbringing. Um, and so, you know, and then my current teacher, Linda Ruth, she's the one who ordained me. She, she comes from a Jewish background, and it's hard. I mean, but I also feel like that this is the nature of Buddhism. It's pretty syncretic. Like you look at uh, Japanese Buddhism, like there's a pine needle stitch on the back of my rakasu, and that's not Buddhist, that's Shinto. You know what I mean? It's like there's no there's no Buddhist connection to the pine needle. Uh that's
Yeah.
a that's so so yeah, I'm honest, but I also but they still I do fit into that category of like a catch-all. Um so it does happen. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's great that you are, yeah, it allows for some conversations with people that aren't totally familiar with Zen in the first place, but it does allow for like maybe a little bit more of an open door that you can have to offer people as they kind of come in and out. And I don't ask this, because I'm not sure like what you can answer, but like what do you find to be like a common
Mm.
concern that comes to you from soldiers and from various ranks? Like, is there one thing of just kind of like, I miss my family, or I have this personal concern happening?
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked that question. Uh because a lot of the time when people ask me questions about being an army chaplain, they'll say something like how do you support soldiers to kill, or how do you support, and I'm always sitting there like it always kind of comes out of left field because it's so far away from my reality of being an army chaplain. Like no soldier has ever come to me and said like, "Hey, can you make me a better killer?" Uh or even like, someone was like worried about McMindfulness and like that maybe like what I'm teaching like makes soldiers like better shots at the range, right? And I was like, it just always comes out of left field, where I'm like, if you ever asked any of my soldiers, like, "Oh yeah, did you go see Chaplain Keith so you could get a better qualification shot?" They'd be like, "Chaplain Keith doesn't carry a weapon," like, and he's not a firearms instructor. Like, why would I ever ask the chaplain about like how to shoot better? But I always wonder, I was like, why don't you ask me like what the soldiers are asking me about? And they're, it's since being an army chaplain, I've dealt with soldiers who were like raped on duty, you know, um, and then come to me with both their emotional side of it, but also, what can I do? And of course, like I'm not in the business of giving advice because uh it's like I'm not going to be there to receive the consequence of the advice that I give. That's you, right? I was like, but what I can do is like lay out both the formal army options and the life options. I mean, you could report this to local law enforcement, right? Et cetera, et cetera. What do you want to do? Here are all your options. Like what, like where do you want to go with this? And with that soldier, I'm still in contact. That happened like a year ago, and we still talk on a regular basis. And he's also talking, and that's another thing I do is like say, hey, this is like a behavioral health. You need to speak to a therapist, or we have what we call BHOs, behavioral health officers, and yeah, get them the help that they need. So he's talking with both, me and behavioral health officers. People who get in trouble want to come see the chaplain. Like, hey, I got a DUI. Like, this is going to uh, trigger a red flag in my profile. How do I deal with this? People who have been cheated on. The infidelity is a big thing in army life. Both being the recipient of and the perpetrator of. People in inappropriate relationships in the rank structure where you're not supposed to, you're not supposed to fraternize essentially. Um, all kinds of stuff. Fear of death, and then and even I think one of the more unique, this just happened a couple weeks ago. A soldier came to me and said, "Hey, like I know what the Bible tells me, like fear not, and I'm a good Christian and I'm gonna go to heaven, but we're going to deploy and like I'm afraid, you know, I'm afraid of dying and I feel guilty for having this fear when this book that I believe in, the Bible, you know, tells me not to fear and I shouldn't fear, right? Because I'm going to go to heaven, etc. Right? So you help people work out these dilemmas. Everything. I mean, I don't think there's one thing I haven't seen yet. Yeah,
Wow.
addiction. You know,
Everything. Yeah,
two
and
s-
mhm.
two soldiers, you know, beat each other senseless, and they both came to me and were like, "How do we deal with this?" They were drunk, and yeah, it was like, "How do we deal with this?" People know about it, et cetera, et cetera. Things like that, you know. So there's, it's like you're a social worker. You're. I mean, I'm not a social worker, but you end up being, because of the structure of the army. Behavioral health officers usually sit at what we call the brigade level, so they maybe have like 3 to 4,000 soldiers. Um, as a army chaplain at my rank, I'm at the battalion level, so I'll take care of, you know, an entire battalion, which could be between 600 to 1,000 soldiers. I'm a little more available than that social worker who's, because the army hires social workers too, right? But yeah, and then I work with those people and try and manage their time too, because they're such a limited resource. It's like, what can I do for you? And then if it needs to be elevated to a higher level, then, or not a higher level, but a different level, right? This is a mental health issue, etc. Um, yeah. So, and then sometimes, you know, you're just there to like I usually offer zazen. Depends. There have been um, posts where I've offered zazen every single morning because I'm sitting anyway. So I'll just open up the chapel and people can come in before they go get chow. And you're just sort of that touchstone for them. And a lot of it is maintaining what we call a ministry of presence, so that when something does come up, it's like not the first time we're meeting, you know. And chaplains can really and just to be clear, I'm an Army National Guard chaplain,
Mm-mm.
um, which has some implications. On the National Guard side, I'm currently getting ready for a big Army mob. So, big Army will task National Guard units to go overseas and handle big Army missions. Uh, and but when I'm stateside, I can be with like a set of soldiers for years. I could stay with them for like 10 years. So you've known them for a long time. That's a little unusual in the big Army chaplaincy, where you know, you move every 3 years, right? So, and now I'm actually jumping into something that's like super unique. I'm actually going over as a two-person detachment. So it'll be myself and then my assistant, who's a staff sergeant, and it'll just be me and him uh, in the Middle East, handling whatever our higher echelon decides we need to do, and that could be like traveling quite a bit, or it could be like, hey, this battalion's missing a chaplain. You're their new chaplain. So I'll be meeting people I've never met before, and then staying with them in a situation they may have never been in before, right? So we'll all kind of be figuring it out as we go. And I think that's what's most unique about being an army chaplain as opposed to like a prison chaplain or a hospital chaplain. If you're a hospital chaplain, you're not a doctor and you're also not sick, right? So there's this separation between you and who you're serving. If you're a prison chaplain, you're not law enforcement and you're also not an inmate. As an army chaplain, you are a soldier. You wear a uniform. If there's no food for the soldiers, there's no food for you. If the soldiers are taking attacks, you're also taking attacks. You know, it's like uh, if the base gets bombed by some drone or something like that, like I may have been injured with them or not, you know, but I was there, right? So, so you're like, it's kind of a pressure cooker for a chaplain because I have to dig pretty deep, you know. There have been some times where you're just as miserable as everyone else, but but you gotta dig deep and provide some sacred space. So.
And
Yeah.
is that what kind of drove you to get into it in the first place? Because I know like you've done uh, forest fire work, and that's a service in its own way. Doing high intensity uh, like a hazard control, and then you found yourself, if I'm not mistaken, just from looking at some of your pictures, but like you also are uh, have experience with the San Rafael Police Department, or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
and
I was a San Rafael police officer, and I was also a, Bay Area Rapid Transit police officer. And that came after Wildland Fire. I got into the academy and did like a 6-month academy, and then spent about, a year working patrol. And yeah, yeah. So I'm drawn to intensity, and it probably comes from being raised in a Marine Corps household. I'm not opposed to uniforms, and really wanted to be able to provide, a more contemplative approach to all these things. My father, after he retired, my father's a retired master sergeant out of the Marine Corps, and he's now a VA social worker. And so we've had these kind of like parallel paths, where he deals with things at the VA, and he helps me and I help him, and yeah, so we're resources for each other.
yeah,
But it's yeah, it's interesting. And I think what it, the biggest challenge is, yeah, keeping yourself physically and mentally well, while being exposed to all these environments, and definitely on the law enforcement side, that law enforcement is probably the most challenging job I've ever had. Second to being a public school teacher. It's really, and they're similar in so many ways, where it's you see a problem, right? And what I really appreciated about San Rafael Police Department was its emphasis on you're a problem solver. Like, solve this problem. That does not mean you need to make an arrest. That you need to find out if a crime has been committed. You need to find out, like, is it a felony or a misdemeanor? If it's a misdemeanor, does someone want to press charges or not? And like, how do we solve the problem? Uh, the implied task, or the implied thing that you can't really get around, is I'm limited in my ability to solve problems that I perceive, right? And a lot of the problems you perceive are like, this is a drug addiction problem, this is a mental health problem, and I don't have the time, the training, or the resources to deal with this right now. And unfortunately, either does, the United States of America, because there were calls that I would be on where we needed a social worker. And yeah, there is a network of social workers who are on call, and you call them. Um, and I don't want to throw shade, but I can count how many times we called the network, the organization, to show up, and like, yeah, they don't show up at 2 in the morning. They don't show up at 3 in the morning. Where like military and law enforcement and fire culture, like, you have some training and you have some expectation that this is kind of a 24/7 operation, especially on the wildland federal side of things, right? Like, structure fire, like, they have, their own schedule. But for us, it's like we're ready to deploy at a moment's notice because we train for that. And I feel like what's missing from the rest of the resources that the world needs is they're kind of on the banker hours, like, and that's not when the problems generally get the rowdiest. So um, yeah, it's a challenge to be in a role and then feel like this is not the right tool for this job, but it's the only tool I have right now. So, um, yeah,
yeah. And I feel like life is a 24/7 experience, right? And so you got to be
yeah,
ready for like people that work in your capacity and the capacities that you are familiar with, and also just the vast scope of things that you've been a part of. Those all address things that happen at a moment's notice, and that can be at 2 in the morning. It could be on Labor Day. It could be it could be on days that are otherwise holidays for bankers and all that. So
yeah,
yeah, no, that's it's an important thing to know, and it's an important thing for you also just to understand the what you're saying about how the United States or something like that just isn't necessarily prepared or has prepared emergency workers in all the different capacities to address every single problem because it's just I don't know exactly why, but like the reality of it is that it isn't there. It is not
Yeah,
everyone is able to address everything to its fullest, and so
yeah,
you are limited, and there's something to hold with that. There's like well, I know what the problem is, but I can't solve it because of this, that. So what I have to do is do what I can in my capacity, and that's a lot. But you still show up to that experience, so you still show up to that event with as much preparedness as you can.
yeah,
Um, and this has been such a wonderful conversation. And I could continue asking you quite a bit, but I wanted to come to a close on it with one question of if there was something that you would want either like to promote or to like whether it's a book or a cause or like
oh,
a foundation or anything like that you'd want. I know
yeah,
you'd recommended something about like give me the rhinoceros or something like that. I know you'd mentioned that in one of your
oh,
posts.
yeah,
That was
yeah,
one, and then also too, if there's any kind of advice that you'd want to give to somebody who is at any point in their Buddhist path, just like what you'd want to hear during that time.
yeah. I think rather than name a specific organization, I would say, from a Buddhist perspective, support the Buddhist network in your local area. You know, um, having lived at Zen Center for 10 years, I feel like temples are struggling to support themselves, and like those resources, I think will dry up. You know, and but I also feel that the local temple is it was the most formative for me. Um, we have the saying in the Suzuki Roshi lineage, like warm hand to warm hand transmission, and there's really no substitute for for uh, for meeting those mentors and those teachers and those priests and whatnot in your local community, and really supporting them. Whether it's financially or volunteering or whatever. But it takes a lot, to like I spent 10 years there, and I could have spent 30 more years there to really be a holder of the tradition and all of the things that we can offer. And I can say that, like, uh the 10 years I spent there helped me every single day. you know um they helped me navigate uh samsara, this crazy world, with all of its challenges. As far as books go, I feel like if I name a book, so I've been reading Bring Me the Rhinoceros, because that's kind of where I'm at right now with my practice, like this very creative. uh I have to be creative with how I practice now. And so it's very personal, right? It's like, where are you at? It's like there were times where, you know Hardcore Zen was my book. There were times where Uchiyama's Opening the Hand of Thought was my book. So I really feel like, um, figure out where you are with your practice, and then go meet your local person to help you, sort of mentor you and share their story and their path, and podcasts like you offer. Like, I actually, I watch your podcast now, and I get inspired, which is, priceless. So
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Well,
yeah. No,
yeah,
no, your podcast has inspired me for sure.
oh, good. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm so grateful to have you check it out, but also to have you be a part of it. I mean, because I felt very inspired by uh, much of what we talked about today, and just to go back to what you were saying about this kind of advice of just kind of recognizing where you're at, because I think sometimes you're like, oh, my head's on fire, right? I want to go practice, so I'm going to go pick up the most complicated dry textbook on this that I can, or
Yeah,
philosophical work, and then you get overwhelmed and you put it down and then you get sad or whatever it is.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, like grab the book that's gonna serve,
Sure.
keep the fire going in a healthy way,
Yeah.
and to keep yourself sustained. Well,
Yeah, and personally, I guess, as you say, like, if I have two foundational sutras that I keep going back to, Lankavatara Sutra.
Mhm.
and the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra is yeah, it's that's kind of like my bedrock, you know? And then that's like my Thanksgiving meal of Dharma, right? And then I choose like other teachings as like, okay, I just need to stop at McDonald's right now and like get something, you know, like, but yeah, all at the right time, you know. So
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful way of thinking. So is the Lotus Sutra something that you revisit like once a year? Is it kind of like that sort of thing, or is it kind of like a constant
yeah,
pickup,
no, at
replenishing?
least once, a couple times a year. It's I think it's probably my teacher's favorite sutra, uh, Linda Ruth, and again, I was so hesitant to like dig into that book. I don't know if you've ever looked at it. But you know the stories out of it are, you know, the one that comes to mind is like when the Buddha forgives Devadatta, you know, where Ananda's like Devadatta should he'll never be reborn as a reborn as a bodhisattva, and the Buddha's like, no, no, like he helped me develop the paramitas, and like I'm grateful to Devadatta who tried to kill me. You know what I mean? It's like it's radical dharma. Um, so and it has its place, right? It has
Yeah.
its time. So
Yeah, well, that's
yeah,
wonderful. It's also wonderful to hear that, it's not just books that are about Zen experiences, but also the sutras themselves are things to be picked up more than once, to really kind of sit with as
yeah.
well. Well, thank you, Kogan. Thank you so much for speaking
Hey,
with me
thank
today.
you.
Chaplain Keith, this has been such
Yeah,
a wonderful conversation, and yeah, I look forward to hopefully catching up with you again soon. There's so much here to think about and to be inspired by, and I know you're soon to be deployed, working in another capacity soon, and I wish you the best of luck in every way while you do that. And also just from your monastic work, from your work as a Zen priest, from your work as a forest fire, wildfire um, worker, from your time as an army chaplain, as a police officer, as a national park ranger. Thank you so much for all of your service.
hey,
You really
thanks.
do.
Thanks for the
It's
support.
as
Yeah,
a yeah, I just really admire it a great deal. So thank you very much.
thank you. All right.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a good one, and we'll
Hey,
check in
thank
soon.
you. All right.
Okay. All
Take
right.
care. Okay.
Bye.